The work of this group is inherently connected to the land and therefore its people. We live and work on the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Anishinaabe peoples. We are committed to honoring our responsibilities as treaty people within the Williams Treaties and Treaty 13 and the role we play in reconciliation. This group acknowledges that the York Region food system is built on a history of oppression that continues to this day. The ongoing process of colonization has diminished traditional food systems and attempted to undermine the cultural food traditions of Indigenous communities. We recognize that these communities continue to be impacted disproportionately by food insecurity, which can only be addressed by autonomy and support if requested. In order to push back against colonialism, we must reflect on, break down, and rebuild our mindsets and actions. As a working group of the York Region Food Council, we seek to meaningfully engage diverse voices that represent York Region's communities and address issues in appropriate and relevant ways. By addressing issues related to food on a local scale, we strive for systemic change in food, community, and social justice.
Today's topic is all about finding career paths in food, and you will see from many, many different angles that you can approach it with. So whether you are already in the industry and just want to see what's going on, see what other people are up to, or you have no idea how you will get into the industry and you just want to, this will be the discussion for you. We're going to go over a bunch of different backgrounds, see how people got into this space, any advice they have, and then there's going to be an opportunity at the end to ask whatever questions you want. So, a little bit of housekeeping before we get into talking about the panelists. As I mentioned, the meeting is being recorded and it will be shared online. So please keep your videos off and microphones off to prevent any distractions. And then when you have any questions, feel free to either raise your hand or preferably type the questions in chat and we will get to them as soon as we can. All right, perfect. So now that we have that out the way, we've introduced ourselves a little bit. Let's introduce the panelists. I'm going to give a brief introduction for all of them so we know who we're dealing with here. And then they will also have the floor to introduce themselves if there's anything else, or if you'd like to know you can check the meeting recording or find them via a simple Google search. So first we have Karina, who is an agricultural researcher, educator, and farm laborer. She's worked on farms since she was 19, is passionate about combining research and academics with actually getting her hands dirty and having work in the field. So she's worked in environmental education and most recently with the Nova Scotia Department of Agriculture to promote local organic produce in post-secondary institutions. And maybe most exciting, or at least most exciting to me, she moved out of Ontario last year and started an organic vegetable farm this year. The absolute dream. Next up, we have Lexi, who graduated from his master's program at the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy in 2019. Since then, he's worked with large corporations and governments to do scenario planning for the, as we all know, increasingly uncertain global political landscape. He, in this work, realized that there are so many sectors and basically most of the economy was missing a crucial connection to the natural environment. And that drove him to found Rhizome, which is a startup focused on regreening urban infrastructure with a focus on circularity and climate adaptation. His goal is simple, to connect business interests with true climate impact. And finally, last but not least, we have Michelle, who has over a decade of environmental nonprofit experience, is currently the coordinator of the Nourish Fund at Fair Finance Fund, and part-time coordinator at Market City TO. She has a master's in environmental science from York, researched decolonizing local food culture, and was recognized in the Outstanding Graduate Student Papers series, and was also awarded the President's Sustainability Leadership Award for her role in expanding York's good food markets. So we have a few pretty heavy hitters on this panel and people with a lot of experience and in a lot of different areas, everywhere from farming to finance to circular waste systems. So we have people from all across the board, but we're going to get some questions and see how they got into the space, what their biggest challenges were, and what advice they would have. So, the first question, and this is open to any of the three of you, is what made you want to get into working in food? The most simple, foundational, straightforward, but what was it for you that drove you to get into this space?
Go ahead, Karina.
Thanks. I was just gonna say, I guess maybe I'll go first because I, in some ways, have the most direct work with food, um, because I grow it. I guess for me, it's the most basic necessity of life, and I know some people are really into, cooking for others. That's their way of providing love and care for people. But for me, it's being able to actually supply people with the food that they need. um, I think it's just awesome, and to see the transition of seed to seedling to a whole squash is pretty incredible. And I love the autonomy that growing food gives me, kind of being able to work within the scope of nature, within the seasons, and being really at the mercy of weather is pretty incredible. You're not working for a boss behind a computer, but you're actually, the environment is your boss in some way. So for me, that's what I really love about working with food and how I got into it.
I guess I'll jump in next. So, um, I've always been interested in food. It's something that has not always been a core component of my career, I'll admit, and it's something that I'm focusing more and more on, which is really exciting to me. I've grown up always being interested in nature and in the connection to our food system through nature. I grew up being a farmhand in a small town in northern Ontario, and I mean, in those types of environments, you are intimately connected with your food, as Karina knows very well. And I remember, just seeing the literal farm to table taking place, and then going to the grocery store the next day and not knowing the where that food came from. And I think that um, I've had the privilege of having always had access to food and having an environment that provides that food, and whether or not it was my farm experience or working for a restaurant in the south of France in my later years, food has always been a passion of mine. So we're seeing a politicization of food. We see a lot of food insecurity as well taking place, and I think that this is just more of a reason for me to start to think about how to integrate food into my career.
I don't think it was just a single thing. I've just sort of really been interested in food. I like talking about food. I like food content. I like to eat. I like growing vegetables. One day would love to be a farmer. Karina, absolutely living the dream. But I've always also lived in a city, so it hasn't been easy to just sort of access rural farmland, for example. And I've also just sort of been interested in like how or why there are so many that don't have access to food, but there's also like simultaneous waste and almost an excess of food production. And that's actually how I started my undergrad in political science, because I was just sort of curious as to why sort of systemically that's an issue. And I think more or less that's what made me want to get into food, because I still wanted to just talk about it all the time and eventually still be kind of adjacent to agriculture, but did care about the fact that there were such high rates of food insecurity.
That makes sense. So it sounds like, everything kind of starts from eating. Everybody enjoys that at base, and then eventually, I guess you end up working on it 40 hours a week forever. One question that I kind of wanted to ask is I've, I've just finished up university, but I know that a lot of people here are in high school, middle of university, even out of university, trying to figure out what they want to do. And food is an option, right? It's not certain, but I think one of the biggest gaps in career hunting or choosing what career you want to do is people are actually surprised by the day-to-day life of the careers they look at. And we can either demonize or glorify certain career paths without actually knowing what a week, what a day, you know, what an hour in that career looks like and what it's taken up with. So I think one of the most helpful things for people choosing their career is to see that and get a bit of perspective on that. So I will pose the question in honest terms, good, bad, ugly, and all. What does a typical work week or work day look like for you? And I'll go reverse order. So Michelle, you're up to bat.
Sure. I have a pretty interesting work situation. So most time I'm with the Fair Finance Fund, and just a few hours a week I support project coordination with Market City TO. And Market City TO is an emerging network of public market managers, vendors, and stakeholders in the GTA. The Fair Finance Fund is a nonprofit social finance fund, and my job includes developing and piloting a fund specifically for urban farmers and food entrepreneurs. And we're going to pilot this in Scarborough next year. And then if it's successful, it'll scale hopefully to other cities as well. So there isn't a typical work day or work week because it is a project that's evolving. So the fund itself has not launched yet. It's going to start next year. So right now I'm doing a lot of research and learning. I don't have a finance background. So all of my free time has been deep diving into that. Some weeks are pretty chill, honestly. Like, I can wake up, sleep in. I don't have any Zoom meetings, so I can sort of get to things when I feel like it. So other weeks are really intense. It's not just about like Zoom meetings, but deadlines, moving parts, and all of these other things. Then occasionally I'll do site visits. So we'll have loan clients in mostly anything that I can commute to. If it's too far, I'm not going to go to them. But if we have any loan clients in the city, I'll be able to drive to them, take videos for social media and stuff like that, ask them how their business is going, and check in on, the relationship in terms of like making sure they're okay with payments and stuff like that. And with Market City TO, same thing. Right now, we're working on a report for the city of Toronto that is inviting them to have Toronto be a public market city, to sort of embrace not just farmers markets, but all sorts of public markets that promote food security and food sovereignty. So there hasn't been a typical work week or even month or day for me since I've started. I've been with the Fair Finance Fund since April. Every month has been different. Every month changes based on what needs to happen next. And but it's a lot of Zoom, occasional farm visits, which are always fun. And I think the hardest part is the discipline with working remotely and meeting your deadlines when you have all the distractions and free time and stuff like that.
And one follow-up on that. So, I mean, I think there's admin work and administrative work that just kind of is inevitable, and
Yeah.
meetings and those sort of things are inevitable. But if you had to pick one, I know you said you didn't have a finance background, so you have some catching up, right? But
Mhm.
if you were to go back to, say, first year university or actually grade 12, right, when you're picking, would you have, which skill do you think is more important for you to have learned, either the finance background or the sales side, like the sales, people skills, communication, because that doesn't really get taught in classrooms, but it's also
Mhm.
important. Which one do you think is, a bigger priority for what you do?
I'll be honest with you, I think both are equally important. From my experience, having those soft skills and emotional intelligence is really important in talking to investors, asking wealthy people for their money to invest in your project, but also talking to farmers and business owners to be able to get a sense of what their needs are and translate that into financial mechanisms. Because sometimes it gets emotional, like as Karina, I'm sure can attest to, like being a farmer is not easy. And like it's not assumed that every farmer comes with this business and financial acumen. And sometimes that doesn't come out until you have a couple conversations. And I've found that emotional intelligence and being able to relate to people has been like incredibly important, and as important as understanding things like finances, microloans, and how to help somebody apply for a loan. I wouldn't necessarily say that one was more or less important. I've definitely been in situations where if I didn't have the sort of people skills that I did, a deal would have fallen through, or we would have lost a client, for example. So yeah, hope that answers your question.
I will I'll actually parlay that into Karina to ask you about that. I mean, before the question of like what your day-to-day looks like, how's your experience been? Because you're kind of at that intersection between you have that academic background and then the farm world is very different from that. So what's, I guess, your experience been combining those two?
I'll start by saying I think there's a huge misconception around farmers being uneducated. Farmers, I think, are some of the most educated people I know. On the street I live on alone, there's a bunch of farmers on this road. We all come from very different backgrounds. My neighbors were engineers, investment bankers, psychologists, social workers that all transitioned to farming. So with this new wave of new generation farmers, a lot of people come from different backgrounds that decided that they really want to switch up their life and they want to exist in a different way that's a bit different than the conventional norm. But on the other hand, there are still so many generational farmers, especially where I am in Nova Scotia. Some of the farmers I've worked with come from 300 years of farmers here. So it's this ingrained knowledge in you as well. So it's quite difficult because especially when I was working on my master's research, I'm coming in from this academic lens, trying to talk to farmers, and farmers are often apprehensive because you're coming in from this like ivory tower institution and you're trying to get all this information from them. But the day of a farmer is incredibly difficult. You have people working out in the fields for 12, 14 hours a day. They don't have time necessarily to talk to researchers sometimes. So it's kind of finding that middle ground of meeting farmers where they're at, especially when it comes from an academic lens. Yeah.
And then for you, what is what does a daily, weekly existence look like for you on the farm?
So I've had many different jobs. I've been an educator, I've been an academic researcher, I've worked for government. Farming is by far the hardest job I've ever had, but it is also the most rewarding. Um, like you mentioned earlier, this year, my partner and I started our own vegetable production farm, and we also have had to work off farm. So we both are the only workers on this farm. We grow and manage everything. And we also have part-time work off farm as well. So I've been working with ACORN, which is the Atlantic Regional Organization of Organic Growers. And I've been doing some admin work for them online. My partner does home renovation work on the side. So we've both had to kind of work off farm. But otherwise, right now we've closed the farm for the season. It is winter. We're kind of done until March. Um, but it would be planting, it'd be harvesting, it'd be preparing garden beds, it'd be building greenhouses. It's so many things, and everything depends on what point of the season you're in and also what the weather is like too. So
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean,
yeah.
I hope nobody at least thought that being a farmer was easy when they entered this call, but if so, bad news. Now let's get Lexi on this. What about you? What's your day and week look like?
Yeah, I mean it's different definitely from both Michelle and Karina. I have a full-time job as an operations manager for a construction firm. So that's, you know, a large part of my day is spending time deep in, you know, Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations, making sure that people are doing the things that they should be doing operationally. And on the side, I'm also starting a business that's focused on turning waste into growing mediums. And so, you know, tomorrow I've taken the day off of my regular job to kick off a project with Seneca College out of York University that's focused on studying the nutrients profiles of common construction waste. So wood, drywall, brick, and all of those types of different things that you see coming out of sites that currently land in our landfill. So there's you know, there's not really an average day for me, I would say. I think some days I spend a little bit more balanced towards my business and starting that. Other days I spend a little bit more balanced towards the needs of the business that's you know, currently paying my bills. And so there's definitely sort of an ebb and flow, I would say. I think um, the unique element and something that I think a lot of people go through when starting a business or even when thinking about doing any form of sort of, you know, side, quote unquote, side hustle or anything like that is that it's difficult sometimes to make the time. And at the same time, I think there is an inherent connection between industries, and I think that's what I'm kind of excited about exploring, is the connection between the construction industry and the agricultural or urban growing industry, and you know, how we use our resources. And I think, you know, if I think back to my time spent as a farmhand when I was younger, there was really no waste on the farm. There's no room for that type of thing on the farm, and I think that it has that sort of approach has a place in our current economic machine, thinking about how we use waste and how we use, well, quote unquote waste, but really the resources that should be made available for further use, and if not just for the use, then for growing food.
Makes sense. One thing that came to mind quickly, I'll get all of you actually to say, now that you've said what your days look like, in 1, 2, 3 words max, what is the one thing that if people hate, they should avoid your career path? We'll go reverse order, Lexi.
I mean, I would say if you don't like being behind a computer, then you know, it's a difficult career path to go for. I think Karina and Michelle will have very different answers than me, only because I am slightly farm adjacent and slightly food adjacent currently. So my career path has been more oriented towards you know, computer time. So um, yeah, I think that's the one I would say.
That was not 1 to 2 to 3 words, but we will allow
That
it.
was not.
I might summarize that and say Excel, because Excel.
A
But
handy tool nonetheless.
yeah. All right. Michelle, what about you?
Excel, Zoom, deadlines.
Oh no.
So if you hate all three of those things, just, yeah, find something else, I guess.
That's fair. How about you, Karina?
Hard physical labor and bad weather. If you don't like moving, if you don't like being out in the rain, don't bother.
So you kind of have both extremes here. So I mean, everyone can make the decision for themselves. For the next question, this is a long one and it's a combination of everyone. So let me lock in, make sure I read it right. So we have experience here in farming, food waste circularity and waste to resource models, and social financing. So you are all very different, but everyone here more or less has the same central goal, which is making the world better through food. Whether that's stewarding the land, working towards food justice, building local economies, or some mix of everything. So, as much as everyone's still on their journey and there's a lot more to be done, the two questions in one on this one is one, what are you most proud of yourself for in this space? And two, what is the biggest challenge that you faced or are still facing in trying to get to your goal? I won't pick someone because this is a long one. So whoever feels it first can answer.
I don't mind jumping in. I'll answer in the way you asked. So the first was what we're most proud of, right? In our work. So I'm definitely the most proud of the fact that at the Fair Finance Fund in 2020, they underwent anti-oppression training, and then in recognizing their own bias and issues within the organization, in my opinion, did a really good job for an organization to literally put their money where their mouth is. What they did was the opposite of sort of performative activism, and they created what is called the Inclusive Prosperity Project. From the Inclusive Prosperity Project is the Nourish Fund that I'm coordinating, and the African Canadian Farmers Fund. The African Canadian Farmers Fund is an initiative that's aiming to address the historical inequities faced by African Canadian farmers specifically by supporting them in securing farmland tenure long term. And I just really believe it's a step towards a more just and inclusive agricultural sector. I just can't think of anything better than talking about it than actually doing it and like putting money towards something specific. And I think it's really great. Myself and my colleague Afua, we get really excited and nervous talking about it because we know that there's a lot of pushback against DEI. But at the same time, within our respective communities, we know how much this means to farmers of color specifically, not just in Ontario, but in Canada as well. So I'm really proud to sort of be part of a fund that hasn't quite been a thing in Canada yet. Not that there aren't farm funds, there are, but ones that aim to specifically support equity-seeking, marginalized farmers, and especially urban farmers. I'm just really proud of it and excited about it. And to answer your second question, it is a big question, and I'm sure people could go on forever. So I don't mean for this to be so overly simplistic, but I think the culture of individualism makes collective action in general really challenging. And my experience with that are things like applying for grants. Like sometimes organizations, in my opinion, like we have the same goals or values, we could work together, collaborate, partner. And I'm finding it feels more competitive between organizations. Like we're all competing for the same pools of money and grants and funding, even if it's through academia. And I think it's a shame because I feel like if we, across organizations and sectors, were able to collaborate in ways that were easier administratively, that we would be able to have more impact in the world. But when they create these financial mechanisms that sort of promote individualism, and even within organizations, it just makes it that much harder. And I'll stop there. Hope I answered your question.
What an eloquent answer. It's like you had access to this beforehand. Damn.
Thank you.
All right, Lexi, follow it up.
That's a hard one to follow up. That was great. I think I'm terrible at reflecting on what I'm proud of, and so I think I'm going to slightly redirect your question a little bit to the community of people that I have begun to be exposed to in food as I sort of begin my journey down, I guess the urban growing agriculture, food adjacent space. I think it's an extremely welcoming, extremely hardworking, extremely open community of people. And I think that I'm proud of that community more than anything for taking on the challenge of solving our food system problems, for thinking about things like diversity, equity, inclusion, thinking about things like reconciliation, taking a holistic approach to how we address this problem from the very beginning, I think is an amazing feat, and one that should be replicated to Michelle's point across our different challenges or different, grand challenges, if you will, that we're all facing, politically, socially, economically, et cetera. So I think I'm very proud of that community, and I'm hopeful and excited about being a contributing member to that community. I think when it comes to your second question, which is the biggest challenge, I think Michelle hit it on the head. Like it's everything has become in our economic system entirely disconnected from our natural environment. And to be disconnected from our natural environment doesn't just mean that it's not paying attention to or has a potentially negative impact on the natural environment, but that our systems are actually illogical. They're not working for us. We're working against them, and it's a bit mind-blowing, really, when you think about how our food system is organized. We produce so much food that half of it goes to waste, and the other half of the food that we aren't throwing out is half as nutritious as it should be. And we have these amazing institutions that are absolute machines working at producing more and more and more food, with little attention to the fact that our soil is leaching, that we have massive monocrops that are producing millions of tons of food that can and should be used by people, but our system just simply throws the majority of it away. And so I think there are these sort of fundamental and what seem like really grand challenges that we're faced with. And I think that if I were to say, to take one thing away from this panel, I think everyone here is saying it doesn't really matter how you are engaged in the food system, as long as you are engaged and you're paying attention to the systems that you are working within, and are not necessarily critical of them, but just acknowledge that they exist. That's really the challenge that I think we're all faced with, is just understanding what those systems are and how they work. So it's a bit of a long answer maybe, and not one that's super direct, I would say, but it's one that I think highlights just the litany of problems that we have with our food system. And to that end, any work in the food system is good work.
Very good follow-up. All right, Karina, now it's your time to shine.
So definitely I would say what I'm most proud of in my own career path, I think, is staying true to my interests and my goals. And it's really easy to be persuaded by family and friends and society to do what feels safe and conventional. And I think I can speak on behalf of a lot of us here, especially with the GTA being so diverse. I come from an immigrant family, and trying to convince your immigrant parents that you want to farm is really tough. But I got to a place where they support me, they're proud of me, they're like, no, this is what you want to do. And I think being able to show people that farming is a real viable career, that it's important, that it's necessary, that Canada is losing their farmers at such an exponential rate, that we need young people to start getting into farming. That to me has been really awesome. And I've had a lot of really great experiences being able to work with youth in farming as well. When I lived in Toronto, I worked with Food Share, so I got to work on one of their urban farms and work with young people in the city who wanted to learn how to grow. And I think that's what it is for me, is I'm just really proud that it's something that I did do and am doing and will continue to do. But at the same time, I think the biggest challenge is that I don't come from a farming background. I grew up in Richmond Hill, so everything I know about farming I had to learn on my own. I don't come from a farming family where I had land given to me, where I had resources and tools and all this knowledge. So definitely building all that up on my own has been challenging. And unfortunately, the government, both federally and provincially, they definitely support corporations more than they do small farmers. All the grants are primarily in benefit of corporate monoculture growers, not small scale growers. Grants and funding for small growers are really competitive and cutthroat. And maybe, Michelle, you can talk to this a bit more because things are a bit different out here in Nova Scotia than they are in Ontario. But it's challenging trying to prove your worth in the big ag scene and making it known that we need small farmers. And on top of that too, climate change, like it's becoming increasingly unpredictable to plan your farming season, to know what to expect. You might know that from years past, you might expect this weather in March, but you have something totally different because that's just the way the climate is now. And crops are incredibly affected by sporadic weather changes too. You get things growing too quickly, you don't get things growing in time, and there's nothing we can do about that. Like climate change has begun, it started, it's in go mode, and we just have to try to figure out how to work around it. And as a farmer, it's quite difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like the landscape for farming does not look like it's getting any easier, which is unfortunate, but like at least there are some young people who are willing to leave Ontario and move to Nova Scotia and start a farm. Also, I have one more question in the barrel, locked and loaded, but if anyone has a question for, either one panel member, all of them, two of them, whatever it is, now would be the time to send it in the chat and we will try and get that out to them.
I'm gonna add a link into the chat for folks that haven't heard of WYRYFC. It's a worldwide organization that allows people to work on organic farms. It's also a really interesting way to travel. So especially with any of you who are going into university or are out of university or looking for something to do in your summers, I think people should check out WYRYFing for sure. It's such an interesting opportunity.
Can I come?
You can come WYRYF on my farm.
Yeah, let's go. Okay. I do not see anyone asking a question. So this is the last chance. Otherwise, I will drop this one. All right. Well, questions can still pour in and we'll answer it after this. But the question that I have lined up is, I think the hardest part I've seen and experienced about trying to get into this, knowing, you want to end up in food somewhere. The hardest part is knowing where to start. And I've ended up in this place, and, everyone here has mentioned they've ended up in this place because it's their passion. But the journey to get there is not very clean. Like it's very hard to know, where do you work, where should you, maybe internship, should you do projects, should you go into entrepreneurship, do you work a few years before? Like it's all over the place. It's hard to start, it's hard to find these things. So looking at it now, if you were to go back, what advice would you give to someone who is just getting started, in terms of, should they pursue entrepreneurship, get a job first? What type of projects would you have involved yourself in? Big question again, but there we go. I'm going to pick on Lexi.
I don't know why I just felt that one was coming. I think it's a very good question. I mean, everyone's career paths are so different. I think I didn't consider a career really in food until more recently, and I still sometimes have trouble playing the sort of mental gymnastics of understanding how I'm contributing to food, or the food economy. And I think that maybe that's a totally separate conversation around sort of how one interacts with their own imposter syndrome. But I think that those types of dynamics early on play a really big role in the choices that you make. And I think really exploring the things that you do love is a really important first step. And not looking at them as necessarily even potentially career opportunities, but just exploring the things that you love first and foremost, understanding sort of who you are and what you enjoy doing. You know, I know for a fact that when Karina mentioned if you don't like being, you know, soaking wet and covered in mud, don't do this. And like I know for a fact that that's something that I enjoy. And so but I never would have said I want to find a career in being soaking wet and covered in mud. But I think at the end of the day, your approach to your career is really going to be about the experiences that you are open to and the experiences that you are not open to. And I think early on in your career, if you feel like you have the energy to pursue some sort of entrepreneurship and you want to go in that direction, do so, and also do so with you know, systems of support in place so that you know who to ask questions of and how to get information that you might not otherwise have. I think, you know, really early on in your career, the more information you have, the better it will be for you. I also think there's amazing value in starting out in maybe a more traditional style career and exploring what that means and what that looks like, and contributing to food in a different way, contributing to food you know, through a food program, contributing to food through donation or what have you. So there are, I think, a million ways of contributing to the food economy, and really it's just about doing what you love to do. I would say is the core of it.
That's nice. Anyone, who wants to go next?
I can go next. I think especially in your late teens, early 20s, it's just so important to take on all the opportunities you can, because those opportunities start to waver really quick, especially as you get into your later 20s and things start to get a bit more serious. And I really appreciate that in my early 20s, I kind of did everything. I did a lot of different internships. I picked up a lot of different opportunities through my university. I went abroad when I was in school. Just try to get your hands into anything you can. If something interests you, just try it, volunteer. Volunteering is awesome too. Um, because there are just some things that you might not even know that you're interested in. And like Lexi was saying, there's so many different ways to approach food work as well. It doesn't have to be farming. It also doesn't have to be management. It doesn't have to be operational. Like there's so many different ways. Like if you want to become a chef, that's something to do with food as well. Like that's an awesome thing to do too. So really just try everything, especially while you're young and you can.
Those were some great answers. I think I want to piggyback a bit off of Lexi's answer. You said something at the beginning about sort of getting to know what you like. And I think I just want to echo that. I think, especially towards the end of high school, before, you know, whatever your next chapter is going to be, like, it doesn't matter if you don't really know yourself, right? So if you know that you care about food, that's a good start. And then sort of going from, yeah, like, you know, this typical day sounds better than this other typical day. And then like going from there, I don't have anything new to add. They had really great answers. Now I'm just repeating Lexi's whole thing, but yeah, definitely get to know what you like and go from there. One thing I'll add is that, especially in the sort of sustainable agriculture and in environmental field in general, there's so many jobs that have yet to be created. The unfortunate side of climate change is there's so many problems that we have yet to face. And so we're going to need to fund solutions to those problems and eventually hire people with not just the skills, but also the problem solving skills and the passion to do positive change or make positive change for sure. So even if there aren't jobs or careers that you see that you're like, this is the one I want, don't be afraid of innovation and considering entrepreneurship if possible, or, you know, just considering the fact that there's a lot out there that just hasn't come about yet.
Mhm. Those are all very good points about it. I will add one more thing that came up when Lexi was answering about, he'd mentioned having a support system, having people to reach out to. And I think one of the things that I've noticed is, where do you get that, right? Like, you know, if you don't have a system already in place, the best thing that has worked for me, oh my God, what a question in the chat. The best thing that has worked for me has been stupidly and blindly reaching out to people, and, you know, talk to people on LinkedIn, reach out to them on their website, find their email, like you can figure that out, and just give it a shot, even if they're people who are in industries that you don't know. Like, maybe I'm not interested in farming. I should still talk to a farmer, right? Because you never know. And I think the best thing you can probably do to build that network very on is just don't spam people, but be very broad and just reach out to people, and people generally do want to help you. Let's see what questions we have. This is the big question. In your view, what is the future of food?
It's a big question. I think the future of food is everybody is food sovereign. It doesn't matter who you are, but everybody belongs to a group, and you and your group are food sovereign. That is my hope. That's an aspirational future of food. That's not a whether or not that's actually going to happen.
Do
So,
you want to explain quickly food sovereignty? Like a little
sure,
15-second, you know?
sure. Food sovereignty is the ability for somebody to produce food for themselves. And it is a movement that sort of started with peasant farmers. And I'll stop there, but it's basically your ability and your right to grow your own food. And there are a lot of legal mechanisms that prevent people from doing that, unfortunately. So my hope is that the future of food is that we can all grow and eat and live well.
Very nice. Lexi, what's your vision?
I think I mean, it's very similar to Michelle's. It's the future of food is inherently community based and entwined with our natural environment and our urban environment. Um, and I think that the dichotomy between natural and urban needs to slowly sort of fade, and our urban environment needs to become once again a place of nature. And I see food playing a very important role in that transition.
And Karina?
To me, especially in the wake of climate change, I see the future food being more seasonal, and collectively as society, us going back to more seasonal ways of eating. So eating more of what's in season, eating more locally, not relying on the global trade market as much for what we eat, and eating more of what we produce, like Michelle was saying, either on our own through food sovereignty and food autonomy, but also through just supporting our local growers more too.
I think just to add on to everyone's comments as well, I think we're all sort of dancing around the same tree, which is our food system right now is in a bit of a state of I would say disrepair. And our local environment or our global environment is becoming more uncertain. And so are trade routes, to Karina's point, and shipping routes. Um, and ultimately, I think that these these perspectives, and I'm I'll speak just for myself. I believe that my perspective comes from the not necessarily fear, but a what's the word I'm looking for here? It comes from the idea that our food system, as it currently stands, will not be able to support the people that it needs to support. It already isn't, and in the future, it will continue to not. And ultimately, I think the food systems that I feel like we have just described are inherently more resilient to climate disaster, inherently more resilient to economic hardship, inherently more resilient to to all of these other different sort of global and uncontrollable interactions that our food system currently is exposed to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so everything's broken right now, basically, and we have to fix it. Um, I think we only have time for one more quick question, and then we'll do a little closing, see where everyone can find you guys. Um, the
Sebastian,
one,
someone named Sarah had a question earlier in the chat.
yeah,
We should jump back to that.
yeah, that was the quick fingers. She got there first, so we'll give her this question, which was, how do you set good and healthy boundaries when you are working on something that you love? Because everyone may be passionate about this, but you can very quickly burn the candle at both ends and burn out. So, any closing advice that you guys have for that?
Maybe I'll start first, because I think mine might be a bit different. Because I live where I work. For me, it's getting off the farm, leaving, like literally going on a day trip somewhere. That's how I set my boundaries with my work, is I actually have to like get out. Um, and maybe it's the same for Michelle and Lexi as well. Of just turn off your computers and go do something that makes you happy.
For sure. It's a really great question, and it's something I'm honestly still struggling with. Definitely, yes, stepping away from the computer. But I want to say more like emotionally and long term. Having the boundaries is really important. I have this problem where I like to say yes to everything. Like, you're in food, we're values aligned, yes. And then like before you know it, you're, swamped, but not even just swamped, you're also burnt out. And especially if you're going into food systems change because you care about social justice or social injustice, I think it's really important to remember that you don't need to like martyr yourself for the cause. Like, the problems are so big and vast that you need to be well rested and maintain your boundaries in order for you to do the work, whatever that work may be, whatever that looks like for you. So whether it is on the field and farming, or spreadsheets trying to get farmers like grant money, it requires perseverance, and you can't do any of that without rest. And I think we just have this hustle culture, so it's really hard to rest. So work hard, play hard, rest hard. You'll maintain boundaries, and I think you'll be okay.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is you likely all have people in your lives, whether or not, they're in the current same house as you or living situation as you, or otherwise, that also know you and can help you um, understand your own boundaries when it comes to these sorts of things. And I think that relying on, really, that's just a support network is what I'm referring to, again. And I think that support network is um, a very foundational element to setting boundaries and to understanding when it's time to work hard, and then when it's time to rest hard, like Michelle said. So ask people how they see you change, maybe over time, as you are spending more and more time doing the things that you love, and help them set help help them help you set your boundaries.
Very nice,
It's a
very
good
fair.
question.
Yeah, it's not easy, but I think everyone's just figuring it out as we go. So best of luck to everybody as well. And as much as I would like to keep this going, we have about 2 minutes left on our meeting time. So I think that is basically all the time we have for today. So I want to thank everyone for being here and asking questions, listening, hopefully absorbing all of this knowledge.